Hello and welcome to The Person of the Therapist. I'm Dee Preston-Dillon. In this series, we're looking at the stories that therapists bring. How did they arrive at the idea of entering mental health, no matter what decade in their own life, what early experiences might have been an inspiration? What have they learned from their client experience? What are the values, maybe even some of the dangers or hazards in psychotherapy, counseling, social work, psychology, and what message is it that they'd like us all to hear? So delighted to introduce my guest. This is Mariam Qahtani. And Mariam, if you would introduce your field, your specialization, the lens or theoretical orientation that you embrace and the population that you work with. So we can begin right there.
Sure. It's lovely to spend this morning with you, Dr. D. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm a clinical mental health counselor. I currently work at Johns Hopkins. I like to consider myself a psychodynamic, sort of also slash person-centered um, therapist who
Mhm.
is very interested in psychoanalysis. And I like to integrate a lot of, expressive play techniques. When I do that, it feels very important to conceptualize our patients, or I say patients because I work in a hospital, but clients, right? In a psychodynamic way to better
Mhm.
understand,
Mm.
them. I find that very helpful.
Is your population primarily children and adolescents, or do you do the whole lifespan?
Yeah, so right now they're mainly children and adolescents, and I also work closely with the parents.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
hmm
And what else about your own developmental or foundational life brought you into this profession, or maybe that still anchors, that still grounds who you are, what you value, and why you do this work?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Yemen. It's a country in the Middle East. And for those who follow or know about it, it's a country that struggles a lot with, you know, war, devastation, poverty, lack of resources. And I lived through that as a child, and I've seen a lot of that and the impact of that on the person and
Mhm.
the society. And I also saw the bright side of that, which is how relationships were able to help people thrive and experience healing and even happiness and
Mhm.
growth.
Mhm. If I recall correctly, your um, writing and research was focused on the incredible devastation and trauma of children, children abused as war soldiers, children just abused by their earliest entire life world being devastated by war. I wonder if you would comment on something about that still informs your own perspective in working with the trauma clients that you currently see.
Um, so sometimes it's kind of difficult to answer this question, honestly. Yes, that was definitely my focus in my research. I think just watching those kids going through this tremendous amount of trauma is has long standing effects on society, on the country, on families, obviously, but also the person. And that's something I always think about. Like, how are we going to make the world a better place with that being, you know, the case without help, without assistance, without healing? It's very difficult to visualize that.
What a loss, because those children's formative lives, like
Mm,
your own,
mhm.
their entire lived experience absorbing the trauma and the loss of relationships, and then I hear you also mentioning the survival value of relationship,
Yes.
the importance, would you say, the importance of family, of community? Um,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It can be family, community. It could even be like brief connections with people. It doesn't have to be like these, long-standing figures in their lives. Just connections, relationships in general, I think can foster healing, even if it's small. It is a seed, you know.
that brings me to you're using expressive therapies.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you would just name a few of the approaches that you've used, and we might just move right into an example of how you have seen a form of expressive therapy.
Mhm.
And it can be more than one example, of course,
Mhm.
um, because I hear the integration of psychodynamic with person-centered, child-centered, the use of creativity
Mhm.
as you're working with trauma.
Right.
So I'd love to invite you to just share an example with us.
Happy to. This expressive technique, I want to call it, it just emerged very spontaneously in a session. It is the use of puppets.
Mm.
I've had puppets in my office. I wasn't really using them that much. Uh, and I don't know if can I give an example? Is that what
Yeah, yeah. Tell us
uh,
your story, because essentially this series is about the therapist's
right,
story and their experience, even though we don't name or refer to any specifics to clients,
right.
but the the beauty and the power of sharing your experience
Mhm.
is a gem for all the rest of us.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
So I had a client struggling with attachment and anxiety, and having them in the session was very difficult for them just to be with me, a child client. So I consulted with my supervisors. So what do I do? How do I do this? I need them in the session alone without the parent.
Uh,
And they all gave me great tips and ideas. I just trusted my intuitive sense
uh,
that will not work. And so I imagined, like, what if I was that child? What is it that I would need to enter that room and
mm,
to be with this stranger um, to do I don't know what, right?
right. Yeah.
So I figured that that little kid might need like friends, someone to help them come in.
So let's pause right there. So here's a child, they're outside the office.
Right.
They're attached to the parent that brought them. They don't want to leave and
Mhm.
enter the office alone. And
Mhm.
yet, in this particular session you're talking about, that was something that you had planned. And so then what happened?
Then what happened is I let the child be, and I said I'll go inside the office to talk to the friends and see if they still want to meet you. And of course, the child is looking at me like, "What?" And then I started making all these different voices with all these different puppets who are excited about this child and want to meet this child and play with this child. And they're not sure if the child is interested in playing and getting to know them.
Oh,
And that's exactly the moment when the child just stormed in the room,
wow.
very curious about these friends.
What happened when they entered the room? So obviously you had the door open wide enough so
Slightly,
they
no,
could hear all these voices. What
yes.
happened when they stormed in?
When they started, they were just like, "Hi." They were a little hesitant, of course, and a little, nervous. But they were all about talking to the puppets. Yeah, my name is this. I'm this age. Hi, how are you? So they started introducing each other, and it was just a very natural flow, flowing connection between both the puppets and the child. And I almost felt invisible in that moment. It was amazing.
It sounds like an incredible safe
Mhm.
invitation with trust. You said you trusted your own intuition, your own gut. And then on the spot, and this is Thomas Ogden emphasizes this, and that is for therapists to learn how to be inventive in the moment. And what a beautiful example that you just gave us, that
Mm,
you hadn't planned this at all. You had your puppets in there. You left the child in the safety of
mhm.
the parent,
Right.
and then started your own. Now, I'm just curious, what kind of things were your puppets saying?
The puppets were saying similar things that any children would say to each other about a new other child. Who's this kid? Are they coming to play with us? Are they
Oh.
interested? Would they like this toy? Would they not like it? Would they like us? Are they going to stay here long? Stuff like that.
But that's exactly what part of what the child may have also
Mhm.
had in their own heart, which
Right.
is, will I be accepted? Will
Yes.
I be able to play?
Right.
Am I, welcomed to be who I am?
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
a beautiful, and so as the story goes, and then what happened?
And then what happened at the end of the session, that first session, there was like a curiosity about, will you come back and play with us again? And the child was like, of course I will. And that relationship between the puppets and the child, now I use it a lot with many different children, is just amazing for me to see and watch the bond that forms.
Mm,
Of course, they see me talking and working
of
these
course.
puppets, but like I'm invisible at the same time. It's fascinating to me, the imagination of the child. It really activates my own imagination, just being in that moment.
Exactly. It is the imagination within you, the therapist,
Mhm.
that was safe and fun and spontaneous and
Mhm.
welcoming and caring, the empathy, the it, instead of being what traditionally at a fair might be just giddy, kind of funny stuff, you really followed that child-centered heart of, I'm I'm acceptable.
Right.
I'm welcomed. I'm wanted to come
Yes.
back, which are
Right.
very core, beautiful, therapeutic. These are the essentials to
Mhm.
make, no matter how old somebody is, to
Mhm.
help them connect. And I like your word of that you were invisible, because to me, that reflects the humility
Mhm.
of the therapist, that ego
Right.
can go for an espresso.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That your full,
Mhm.
caring, compassionate, and empathic presence was
Yes.
more important than
Exactly.
any
Yep.
outward plan.
Yes, absolutely. And honestly, there's a lot of freedom in that, for the therapist to
Mm,
just be and connect and let that go and just connect on the very deep, profound and also grounded level with a child.
well, then this is I really hear your integration of a variety of theories. So we want to be cautious about sometimes these recipe oriented, do this and this
Right.
constraint. And I feel that you're giving us all permission to stop it, to be more really present, Miriam, the spontaneity. What inside of you
Mhm.
as a human being, what inside of you do you think gave you the permission to be so present and to be willing to take the risks to just spontaneously play within the framework of an empathic relationship? Inside, what
Yeah.
is there inside of you?
I think there is a bunch of things, right? um, like there is a absolute desire to connect, right? But there is a sense of creativity and curiosity
Oh,
and also presence. There's presence inside of me that longs to connect
mm.
to another presence, if that makes sense.
That
And
does. Oh, I just really want to highlight that. The way you just said that, something inside of you. So trusting that
Mm.
rather than working things out in some sort of plan, moving down into a heartfelt place of desire of being authentically connected to the other, to
Yes,
that, to the little ones or
right.
whoever might be there.
Hmm. And authenticity is a big one because, when we distance ourselves from our, child self,
Mm,
we are less authentic. And
mm,
so the closer we get to that part of ourselves, the more authentic we can be, especially sitting
mm,
with a child
mm.
client. You're not this big, adult with glasses and whatnot.
Yeah,
You're also not
intellectualizing the whole thing.
right.
Yeah,
And it's a
yeah.
challenge for me because I'm a headspace person too. So it's a hard exercise. But I've been practicing it so much that it's become easier, you know.
How do you stay creative? What do you do to nourish your own creativity and to keep that fire that burning?
Mm. This is probably something I learned from you, Dr. D, is silence.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
Silence has been a very helpful thing for me to connect with my own thoughts, my own voice,
mm,
and whatever is inside that I'm not hearing.
mhm,
But also like experiences,
mm,
diversifying my experiences in life, no matter how small,
mm,
and spending some time to just reflect on those experiences sometimes.
mhm. And poetry.
Yes, literature, poetry, that's a
Mm,
big part of my
that's
life for sure. Thank you
yeah,
for reminding me of that.
yeah.
Yes,
Mhm,
very.
mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought so. Um, and the your experience, like one of the principles that I treasure is that therapists really need to immerse in some of their own experiences. And so one dimension of that large, beautiful rainbow of the expressive therapies is using symbols and sand. And you've created sand scenes, and I'm wondering
Yeah,
if you'd share how is the immersive experience rather than intellectualizing and reading about it?
yeah.
How has the immersion in creating your own sand scenes, how have you benefited or how does that inform just who you are as a therapist?
I think this experience reminded me, or actually opened my mind about how we move as human beings, not only through the emotional, intellectual, even sense or physical, but also the symbolic.
Hmm.
It's such a powerful thing that happens in our lives, that is in our lives, that we sometimes forget about. And I think the sand therapy just showed me the power
Hmm.
of, yes, the sensory experience
Hmm.
along with the symbolic is just so powerful.
Yeah. And across cultures,
Yes.
every for thousands of years, right? The
Yep.
human ability to create language and to create symbols and rituals and
Mhm.
all the mythology and all of that can come together verbally, but
First time.
importantly, non-verbally to connect mind body. And you really do that in a very beautiful, creative, empowering way. Do you have another, and you may not, but do you have another example from either an adolescent or an adult that you'd like to share?
In terms of using sand or
Oh, anything that an experience that we all can learn from you.
yeah, there are so many, sometimes hard to pick which one, right? There is one that comes to mind where the client did not speak enough English for us to communicate. And this particular client had a hard time playing because of the amount of trauma. There was no flow in their expression at all. And so that was a very hard experience for me to sit down and just do nothing, right? Do nothing. And I allowed myself to be taught by this client what to do, what they need with, as little words as possible, or few words as possible. And so we spent a lot of time just being together, and watching each other. Yes, we exchanged some words, but I followed their lead, and it was a very hard experience for me because we understand that we allow
Mhm,
our patients to, or
mhm.
clients to do that, but sometimes it's hard if they have, you know all the power all the time in that way that we're not used to, that we don't expect. Just come in, sit down, we're not talking, we're just sitting, being present with one another, and that's all we're doing today.
That's so powerful, the presence that you bring to honor their
Mhm.
just readiness, where they are in the moment,
Right.
how they are willing to just sense, is
Mhm.
there trust here?
Yes.
And how do we find our way to collaborate in bridging
Hmm.
that trust? That's beautiful. I'm having a little allergy thing here going on.
Sorry.
So
Yeah.
I'll mute. A seasonal thing. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the things that I like is to ask everyone to bring a couple of symbols that represent for them something about wounding and healing, or something about the qualities that they feel is important in this whole therapeutic process, no matter one's orientation. And so we can spontaneously
Yeah.
really want to hear the stories, and then we can work on the voices and amplification. So what did you bring to share with us today?
It was hard to pick which ones, and I finally figured which ones I'm gonna bring today.
Mhm.
It's always a fun exercise to do.
Uh-huh.
So I brought this one here.
Ooh. Hmm. Mhm.
Um, and there is a person, looks
Mhm.
like a person
Mhm.
reading,
Mhm.
right? And there's a circle around them.
Yes.
Uh, and I like this one because it represents the values that I feel are part of who I am as a person and also as a therapist. You know, spending your time learning, growing, finding answers and questions, you know, and going on journeys.
Mm.
Um,
Let's play with this for a bit, Miriam.
sure.
Don't put it down. Um, how old would you say she is right there in her reading moment? What age would you want to give her?
She's probably 13, 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how is she feeling about herself in the world?
She feels safe, contained, open, curious,
Mhm,
inquisitive,
mhm. What is she reading?
poetry, of course.
Is this circle around her, that what is the feeling? What is the sensorial experience? What does this give her?
Um, it gives her a sense of being contained, but also there is a flow. There is
Hmm.
um, a dynamic energy around her in
Okay.
this circle.
Okay. Now, um, if she were to turn to you first and then to us, but to you first, and silently, you can ask her a question or she can ask you a question,
Mhm.
but don't tell us, because
Okay.
this is the moment in time in the video where we just we honor your silence and just give you a few seconds to
Mhm.
listen in and see what the 13-year-old self, what she would like to say to you.
Okay.
Maybe as the mature midlife woman that you are, the creative therapist that you are, what you would like to say to her. So let's honor that silence. Okay. By your facial expression, there was some communication there. What is it that if she could turn, if we could use active imagination
Mhm,
and she could just turn and speak to us,
mhm.
would you give a voice to her and let her share what she wants us to know from her 13-year-old poetic wisdom?
Yeah. She would say, trust your instinct and follow your path and be of service to
Mm.
others.
Be of service to others. What a safe, curious, open 13-year-old. Is there a question that she wants to direct to us, that she wants us to think about, to seriously reflect on?
Mhm.
What does she want us to start thinking about, to be serious about, maybe?
Yeah. There is a place in the world for you. What is it? What is your place in the world? How can you find that place in your world or in this world?
What a wise 13-year-old. And of course, she is there in service of your clients, of your patients
Mhm,
at the hospital,
mhm.
where she can now also bring her poetic wisdoms and sensibilities. Let's take a moment and switch over to your
Okay.
second symbol,
Yeah.
and then we'll join them.
Yes. I don't know if this would count as a symbol, but it is. Um,
Everything counts as a symbol.
right.
Yes.
I got an orchid.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes, and I love orchids not just for their beauty, but they're for their philosophical value.
Oh,
You know, what they can teach us about
mm,
development.
mm,
Most of the time, when
mm.
the bloom of the orchid is gone, like you don't see these anymore, people assume that it's dead and they throw it away, thinking that it's done, it can't
Oh,
bloom anymore.
oh dear.
But it's in reality, it just needs more patience and waiting and nurturing to bloom again.
I mean, the metaphor right there for how we throw away children, how we throw away teenagers and people throughout their lives for all kinds of reasons. We
Mhm,
throw them away, and yet
mhm.
they need our waiting for the bloom to return. This is so beautiful. Tell me more about your associations with this flowering.
Um, I just love the also the honestly the aesthetic power of
Mm,
orchids.
mhm,
They're simple, they don't have a lot going on, but they're also profoundly beautiful, you know.
mhm.
So yeah, in their simplicity, there's something very aesthetically pleasing about them. You know, they remind us that, less is more sort of thing.
All right, so bring up the 13-year-old and the plant and the orchid, and let's
Okay.
see them together. And so uh, every object is the symbol of our projections and the meaning that
Right.
we bring. And you've just shared with us some pretty powerful metaphors. Can she see the orchid? And what does she make of the orchid? And does the orchid see her?
Yeah, they do see each other.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. What impression, what is her experience of seeing the orchid?
It's a reminder for her
Mhm,
that, growth goes through stages,
mhm,
you know, and um,
Mm.
it's just part of life, right?
And how is the orchid? What's the orchid's experience right now as it looks into the circle and
Mhm.
sees her, the young Mariam, the 13-year-old, the reader of poetry? Mhm.
Um, she is very similar to the orchid in that she is, being nurtured to grow, and
Mhm. Mhm.
she's preparing herself for that cycle,
Mhm.
for what
Mhm.
life will make
Mhm.
her go through, basically.
If they were to have a conversation,
Mhm.
do you imagine who would speak first and what they would say to each other?
Yeah.
Who would lead the dialogue, the I thou experience between them?
I think the orchid would.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can see how that would just pour out either in a poem of their own, the dance
Mhm.
between the girl
Mhm.
and the orchid. I mean, just there it is.
Yeah.
And how they would engage with each other. And then on the third, how they might engage with you, how they would both turn to you. So take a moment, then again, we return to silence and let them turn to you and let them both, in their own momentary closure, what is it they want to say to you? And so while Miriam's doing that, just for us to understand and to highlight how important silence is and the time to just be present with whatever symbols clients bring. And the practice for therapists, whether they work with expressive therapies or not, is to listen for the voices, to listen for the stories, for the poetics. And then sometimes those silent moments turn into a sharing about the lived experience of the individual, the experience of the orchid, the experience of the 13-year-old, and then collectively, the experience of the client, of the therapist. And then imagine you, our viewers, if you were to ask the 13-year-old or the orchid, what would you ask them? Thank you, Mariam. How was that experience for you with the symbols?
Um, Very good is the word that comes up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I'd like to move into some of the important messages or lessons that you've learned. And you give us incredible examples from your clients. But if you were to speak to therapists, be they seasoned or individuals who are just in their graduate studies, who even were looking at this path that you mentioned, what do you think are important things to keep in mind, to be aware of? And were there any bumps in the road for you, challenges that you overcame?
Yeah. So coming to this training to be a clinical mental health counselor, I did not anticipate the amount of transformation that I experienced as just a human being, becoming more conscious. I think my program did a great job with that, helping us to be more self reflective, more conscious, and how that consciousness can help you to let go of things you thought you shouldn't let go of, and how to embrace new experiences, new layers of your being or your authenticity.
So,
Um,
do you want to name your program? one of
Sure.
your programs of study in the psychodynamic realm.
Mhm. Yeah, so I studied at Northwestern. Our program is psychodynamic.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay.
there was a lot of, self-reflection that we had to do, which I
What is
really appreciate.
oh, sorry.
It's okay, go ahead.
No, you mentioned self-reflection and I'm wondering when you said to drop the things that maybe were no longer needed, I'm imagining the kind of injunctions that we all carry around about what not to feel or what
Right,
not or how to be.
right.
Would you give us a specific example to become from your program and from your leaning into a psychodynamic self-awareness,
Hmm.
an example of what you had to drop?
Um, Generally, like it's some sort of ways of being, um,
Mm,
behaviors,
mm,
uh,
fears.
fears, just ways of being that were unconscious
Mm,
and that, maybe I thought I needed or it was
oh, okay. Hmm.
to keep a
Hmm.
certain whatever.
Persona, right? That
Yeah,
this is the way you should be,
right.
and then letting go of those
Mm,
expectations
yes.
to build in more authenticity, to
Yes.
build in more presence and the ability to empower others rather than the self-conscious walking in the world.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
that's a great wisdom, especially for young or anybody even in midlife that's entering, because we do have sometimes
Mhm,
people are in professions for quite a while.
mhm,
They're attorneys or or some other profession,
mhm.
and then they turn to mental health in their latter years. And I like to encourage that. And I think something that you're saying right now is that isn't always emphasized in other programs is that take the time to self-reflect, to
Yes.
become aware of what could sabotage
Yes.
authenticity and presence, and to bring in then what do you feel that you've brought in, what are your strengths, what do you most cherish that really supports you and grounds you in a therapeutic process?
Um, I try to show up as the real me, as authentic as possible. And I like to say authentic slash ethical, as much as possible in the room. I'm not someone else. I'm not
Mm,
the therapist. I am Mariam.
mm, mm,
That's
mhm,
very important to have as a therapist, to be, I should say. Um, and also, you know, just curiosity and openness about the person in front of you.
mm,
I know I hear a lot of like compassion, acceptance, all of that is great,
mm,
absolutely necessary. But we have to let go of our perceived notions of
mm.
who this person might be
Yeah,
and just be constantly curious and open to
I
who the
like that,
person might
to
be.
balance out that presence, but also to really, because you're connecting curiosity with an openness, not a curiosity that's invasive and I want to know,
Exactly.
but more of a curiosity of tell me more, tell me what your life world is like.
Yes.
And I hear and I get a sense from you very strongly that that's respect.
It
That's
is.
that's really anchored in a respectful curiosity rather than a power one up, one down, which
Mhm.
our profession can also unfortunately incubate, that the inequality of power. And my sense of you is that you work very hard to be
Yeah.
present, to certainly be responsible ethically and responsible in terms of the one who contains and who holds and witnesses,
Mhm.
but also that receptivity. I
Yeah.
don't know the
Right.
answers. I don't know who you are. letting go of the expectations, which I think brings us right back to what you were talking about in terms of we don't know what we don't know. We do have hidden expectations that need to be unpacked.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. Is there
Yes,
something else you want us to know that you want to emphasize in this field?
sure.
Mhm.
I believe it is absolutely necessary to foster and to cultivate and to nourish the creative part of us as therapists. Whatever creativity means, and it's all, many different forms.
Mhm.
It is absolutely necessary to, you know, like you said, the word recipe,
Mhm.
about that, you know,
Ah,
and just be your creative, authentic, open witness,
ah.
you know, in the room.
And that, what recipes do and what expectations that are bracketed in really in restrictive kind of ways
Mhm.
at some point reduce presence.
Absolutely. Correct.
So how do we become present without getting lost? Because
Mm.
it's not, you know, a casual conversation, but it really is the very careful bridging of making it safe for that readiness for the
Mm.
voices of trauma to be shared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find listening, actively in it very important, obviously. But I find myself listening on many different dimensions,
Mhm.
not just one way. Um, I listen to not just what is being said, but how many words, why those words, and timing, tone,
Mhm.
all those things, small nuances around expression. Is
Beautiful.
it being said with words? Is it being said non-verbally? How is it being said? Is it being said symbolically? So I listen and on these many different dimensions.
Uh, so essential. Like I really want to highlight, glowingly what you just said. To listen, not like repeating back, but to dig and to keep going down and to keep carefully
Right.
and with timing and pacing that you just said. And that takes really deep listening
Yeah.
and then backing off when our sense, bringing all this mind body sensibilities there. What about culture? I'd like us to touch on your sense of the importance of developing across cultural sensibilities, and for you to speak to that.
Yeah. Um, I learned this word humility, which I love. Just being, open, experiencing that humility, sitting with someone else. But I also feel like just realizing, remembering that that person is not too different than you is absolutely necessary. Humility is wonderful, but it has a certain connotation that there are things between us
Mm.
that I might not get, which is great. Like, yes, we need to be mindful of that,
Mm.
but also we're more similar than we think we are.
Mm. Mhm.
Just remembering that that is absolutely there. We are more similar than we think.
You remind me of one of my favorite leanings into is the existential. And when we combine cross-cultural, global cultural with ethnic identity, personal, gender identity, and all the identities, and then stretching that across with humility and respect,
Mhm.
with our presence in that, and the way you just described that we are more similar as the very underpinnings of being human and human existential experience, our mortality, our drive to be connected in authentic ways, to feel safe, to have freedom, and
Yeah.
to find an identity, to be seen.
Yes.
So much of your work, I think, is builds that connection, psychodynamic, client-centered, the expressive, with the cultural sensibilities that are not concretized, but that really reach down to the existential depths.
Hmm. Yes, I believe that that tends to be a challenge, unfortunately,
Mm.
for a lot of therapists, you know, getting to the bottom of that sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely.
If you could change anything about therapist education, what's the one thing you'd want to change? How would you how would you make it more effective, or uh, to help therapists become more attuned, or whatever you think they need? What's the one thing you would really like to see?
This might sound like a departure of of all the things we've been saying so far,
Right?
but but I honestly think it is absolutely necessary for the therapist to also be an intellectual,
Mhm.
a reader, a traveler, an explorer,
Mm,
someone who is so invested in learning and being educated on many different domains, not just clinical work
mm.
or clinical books, just everything you can read, read it.
You speak my heart. So, because
Yes.
how can we be ready to
Mhm.
help support in terms of really pushing back the walls of curiosity and
Mhm.
reading across the field? So
Yes.
paleontology and anthropology and poetics and history
Yes.
and drama, just so physics, biology, all of the sciences. So, no, I'm delighted that you grounded us in that intellectual pursuit is also lifelong learning. We don't drop suddenly or just become focused on reading the latest
Right.
psychology or theoretical or technique, but
Right.
rather, I love the richness that you're bringing here, Miriam, because that's what we want. That's where the richness of associations and sparks with intuition come from. That,
Absolutely. That's
right?
right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yay.
Yes. And that
Um,
that sorry. I was
no,
just
please.
that you see the difference between a therapist who is invested in intellectual pursuits and a therapist who isn't. There is a richness about the one, you know, who is invested in that and the one who isn't.
Part of self-care, exercise,
Yeah.
nutrition, reading,
Right.
elaborating the mind and the body and the creative psyche, the creative soul psyche, intuition, whatever words somebody wants to bring to that.
Yeah.
Um, I, I'm going to ask if there's one more element you want to share, and then what I'm going to ask you is to frame this in, because you're more than bilingual, I believe. If you would, Arabic, if you would like to share a summary of what was your experience, or what would you want people to take away who may, that Arabic may be their home language, it may be their native language. Um, but is there any, go ahead if you want to just share main points with our colleagues out there,
Hmm.
and then we'll bring closure back again with English. And my job is to be silent and tune into with my viewers. It's our viewers to tune in to your language and feel the rhythm as you speak, to feel the tone,
Yeah.
and to share, what did we just talk about and why was it important? So I give the platform to you, Mariam.
Thank you, Dr. Dane.
Mhm.
آم، مرحبا أعزائنا المستمعين. اليوم التقيت بالدكتورة دي بريستن ديلان وتحدثنا عن تجربتي الشخصية كمعالجة نفسية تعمل في مستشفى مع الأطفال. تحدثنا عن الأشياء التي تصنع المعالج النفسي؟ ما هي القيم التي أتحلى بها شخصيا؟ وما هي الأمور المهمة التي علينا أن نتعلمها أو نمارسها في آه، تعاملنا مع المراجعين الذين نعمل معهم؟ تطرقنا إلى نقاط مثل الأصالة، كيف نكون أصيلين في هذا العمل، كيف نعبر بشكل إبداعي، كيف نتعلم، كيف ننمو، كيف نتطور في هذا العمل، وكيف نكون حاضرين في هذا العمل، في هذا الوقت الذي نقضيه مع المراجع، كيف نكون حاضرين معه دون أن نطلق عليه أحكام أو نفترض أننا نعرف من نتعامل معه كما لو كنا نحن من سيعالجه، لأنه هو في الواقع من سيقوم بهذا العمل. تطرقنا إلى نقاط أكثر، ولكن هذه هي رؤوس الأقلام هذا اليوم. Thank you, Dr. D.
I just, I love this part of the series because I feel captured, even not knowing your language. I feel so captured and it's a really good practice to not know, but to tune into the rhythm and to your expression. What a pleasure it is.
Thank you for the platform, Dr. D, and for your sense of the other and for your generosity and, you harnessing the importance of being inclusive. So valuable. It really is.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If you were to have one last thing that you would like to say to the viewers as you bring closure, what is it that you want to say to us?
I guess thank you for listening. That's all I can say. Thank you for listening. It is such a gift and for being with us today.
And it is grounded in listening. Mariam, it's been a pleasure and a joy and always a learning as we together, that connection that through your examples, through your metaphors, and through your joyous sharing of your stories. And thank you, viewers, for being with us during this time. I look forward to being with you next time. In the meantime, take gentle care. Build out, as Mariam suggests, the reading, just allowing yourself time for silence and for listening to your own depth. Take very good care. Thank you.